Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to the Roundup. I'm your host, Wendy Corr. And here at the Roundup, we focus on interesting people in the Cowboy state. But today we're kind of shifting a little broader focus. We're going to focus on a couple of very interesting people in the Cowboy state, one very interesting person from Cowboy State Daily, but we're also going to be focusing on a much larger issue and a very topical issue, and that is missing people in Wyoming. And so I'm so grateful to have on the podcast today Desiree Tinoco, who is in Casper, and she is the driving force behind the Missing People of Wyoming. It's a nonprofit. It started out as a Facebook page, but now it's a full nonprofit, and they're just doing amazing work. But also on the podcast today is Jen Kocher, and Jen is a Cowboy State Daily features reporter, but Missing People is her beat. In Cowboy State Daily, we have beats. We've got Leo on the politics beat, and we've got Claire on crime and courts. Jen is our missing persons, and she does a phenomenal job in bringing these stories to life and bringing these stories to all of you so that these people are not forgotten. And Desiree has been working on this really important issue for several years now. So I'm going to kind of toss it down here to Desiree and introduce you. And Desiree, you've lived in Casper for 20 years now, but this is something a family passion for you and your sister. And so tell me a little bit about how this missing persons push to find these people and to create a platform for searching for them. How did this get a hold of you?
Yeah, thanks so much. So my older sister started a missing persons page for Missouri. There's several of them throughout the US. And it was always kind of in the back of my mind that I would start one in Wyoming. I'd never started a group. I'd never ran anything. I wasn't very tech savvy. And two cases came about where they weren't getting attention that I thought they deserved because of these gentlemen's lifestyle, you could say. One was on probation. The other one had drug issues. And they both separately went missing, separate cases. And no one was talking about it. There were no stories on it. It didn't seem like law enforcement was reaching out for the public's help. And they had both been gone for quite some time at this point. So that's when I finally decided I would start a group for Wyoming. There wasn't one at that point on Facebook. And I started looking for resources and basically the stop, drop, and roll of missing persons. And there just really wasn't anything out there publicly. When you have family turning to you as just a civilian asking you for advice, it got overwhelming. And I started to notice a big difference between my group and my sister's group. Obviously, we have a much lower population here in Wyoming. But the group was, blowing up, and it surpassed her group at one point with how many members, even though she'd had hers for, I don't know, probably 4 years before I started my group. So there's this joking about rivalry, with siblings and one trying to outdo the other. And then it's like, no, there's something actually serious going on here. And we realized soon that there wasn't anything provided by the government. So that's when we asked DCI to start their public database, which they were gracious enough to do. So wonderful people to work with over there. They really are. I mean that wholeheartedly. They've been great. And Jen came in shortly later, and she's been wonderful to work with. And really, if it wasn't for her, I don't think I would have accomplished half of what I wanted to. She's always been coaching me, and I couldn't have, done all this without her. I have to just give her a shout out. I'm so glad that she's being interviewed, and instead of being the journalist behind the scenes, she's getting the recognition she deserves as well.
Well, let's talk to Jen Kocher for just a few minutes. Jen, there's something about this idea that there are people out there missing and that nobody can find them that has really touched you as a journalist. Tell me about, Jen, why you decided that this was something that was important for you to report on.
I first got into missing people out of a curiosity for human trafficking. And I saw a post on Facebook because, everything on Facebook is true. And it was about some people in my community in Gillette getting kidnapped in the Walmart parking lot. And I was like, oh my God, something needs to be done. So I knew nothing about human trafficking, and I started looking into it and reached out to the few people I could find, which is how I found Desiree, because I found her missing person website or Facebook page. And the more I learned, I learned that people typically do not get snatched out of parking lots. It's much more nefarious than that. And I was shocked at how many people are actually missing. And in the vacuum, like Desiree said, that happens when a person just disappears. To me, the fact that your family member or you could just disappear, and that's unless there's a lot of media attention and an active friend or family member really pushing to find that person, it's just so easy to disappear. And where do these people go? It's a question that just plagues me.
I think it plagues a lot of people, and that's something that we have a unique platform with Cowboy State Daily, that we're grateful that we do have this opportunity to do this and to speak to people like Desiree. Desiree, you have been you started the Facebook page, the Missing People of Wyoming Facebook page, and turned it into a nonprofit. But then you have all these followers, and you mentioned this just a minute ago, that your number of followers and the people who are keeping track of this has just blown up. How many people do you have following on Facebook right now?
I believe at this time it's just under 35,000. And we go through pretty regularly to make sure there's not spam accounts on there, and making sure everything's verified. I know that it kind of becomes problematic when you start getting into speculation. I know that some speculation groups out there have done some wonderful work when it comes to missing persons. Like Jen mentioned, the whole Walmart kidnapping scenario. And that is something that scares people. And it is, I hate to say, a clickbait kind of thing. We deal with spam accounts constantly. The biggest one right now is, a house for sale. They'll switch it over. It'll be a missing persons. It could be a real missing persons story originally. And they'll just take it and run with it. And people will share that from a spam account. And it does not update you once that post has been changed, once it's modified. And so it's something in order to get your personal information. It'll be a house for sale or puppies for sale, something to scam you. So that's a big one that we've been working on. So trying to keep those spam accounts out is always keeps us busy. Both myself and Amanda Waldron, who help me run the group, we stay fairly busy with trying to keep those out and verifying all the cases on there. But yeah, it's been a wonderful effort by the community to come together. And usually Facebook can be, I always like to joke that it's such a magical place filled with wonderful people, but there's this time and place kind of attitude towards it. And once you hit that group, this isn't about you versus them. There's no arguing. We don't put up with that. We are there to do one job, and that's to share cases, verified cases. And so seeing, the community come together is so wonderful, especially in a place such as Facebook, where it usually doesn't end as well. I think people put their differences aside, and they just want to share those cases and bring those families a little bit of hope.
Well, I think it's amazing what you're doing. I know that there've got to be some cases that have really struck home with you. And what are some of the cases that you carry with you that you just can't shake?
So, early on, Devontae Richardson, he was from Washington, D.C. He went missing. His car was found in Bighorn County.
Right.
And there's just nothing there. There's just nothing to go off of. And given that he's a middle-aged Black man from a different state, not getting the attention that they, unfortunately, like with the Gabby Petitos, not that those cases don't deserve attention, but I think, we treat all cases equal, and we should. You get into cases where there's an Indigenous person or an elderly person, people kind of don't care as much. They want the damsel in distress. They want the little child that, is innocent, and they'll share those cases twice as much. And that's really heartbreaking to see. So I think Devontae was the case that really has always stuck with me. I feel horrible for his family and what they must have gone through during this whole process, especially given that they're so far away. That one really is really frustrating to deal with at times. I just wish there was more attention on that case. I think those are the ones that really typically make me feel a little more compassion for. There's cases that we get a lot more attention and people are constantly sharing, and then there's speculation around them. And I think that can hurt a case more than help. Law enforcement, members of DCI, FBI, people are on that group. These aren't just stay-at-home moms such as myself. There are people on the group that are watching and seeing the comments. And I think it can really hinder a case when you think they haven't heard of those speculations before. You know, like if you have information, call them up. A matter of fact, DCI, and I always advocate for this, they have on their website an option to submit tips anonymously. So if you have something to say, I think that's a wonderful avenue. Some people aren't comfortable speaking with law enforcement about that. You can utilize that.
That's fantastic. Jen, I'm going to throw the same question at you. What was the case that really hooked you into the idea of there's something here that I can help? I can be a voice for this.
I think the first one that really hooked me was Kathleen Perringer, and she disappeared from Riverton, I think it was 1974. Her daughter was only 13 at the time. So her daughter came home from school one day and her mother was just gone. And that was always the fear of mine growing up, that my mother would, I had divorced parents. So it just frightened me that I would lose another parent. And that happened to her. And she immediately got thrown into foster care. And her life has been a really hard life. And I'm still close with the daughter, Kelly. And I just really advocated for that, to try to find answers. That was one. Chance Engelbert was another one. Again, he disappeared during a weekend family trip to Gary, Nebraska. Bizarre, just disappeared. The detective is making some headway on that, but it's still far from being solved. And the one recently that really, really got me is Irene Gakwa, the missing Kenyan nursing student. She disappeared. She moved here with her boyfriend to Gillette and disappeared. She knew nobody. And I reached out to try to find people in the community who know her. And I think I found one, and she barely knew her. They were almost coworkers. So her family, I knew nothing about going searching for missing people. Was nothing I did. I work, you're busy, so you don't get involved. You work from your desk mostly, or from your phone. And there was a search listed, a public search. So I decided I was going to go out, and I was just going to interview the people and kind of talk to the family, and then go my merry way and go home and write a story. And they said, "Do you want to come with us?" And I said, "Well, yes, I do." And so that was my first search. And so I spent the day with them, and we were, going through high grass along highways, all, just tromping over snakes. And in the family, I just got to talking to him, and they were just so lost and so grateful. They came from Idaho for the search, where she first lived before moving to Wyoming. And then after spending that time with them, I'm like, I want to be on the ground every time I possibly can. And I want to get as involved as I possibly can, because not only does it help, I like to be involved, but it also, helps them.
Yes.
To have people who care. And also I can get those stories out.
Yes.
And the more I know, and the more investigating I can do, the better.
I think that's fantastic. I admire so much what both of you are doing. You've got great resources, though, and I want to talk about that real quickly. Desiree, there's been some surveys, you've got some analysis that you have been able to use to bring your information to life, that you can put some numbers behind all of this. Recent study that was done by Emily Grant and Lena Deschert at the Wyoming Survey and Analysis Center. And tell us a little bit about what having that data can do for your mission.
Yeah, they've been wonderful to work with. I have to just say, they're wonderful women. They do a lot of great work. And I called up Emily one day and I said, "Hey, I think there's something off here. And I don't know, because it's hard to find the numbers. But I think Wyoming is behind when it comes to a protocol for missing adults." So for those that don't know, there is a federal protocol for missing children, anyone 21 and under. where if you go missing, they have to go by a certain guideline. For adults, each state is up to their own discretion how they regulate, which, can come with some issues, but we're starting to see what's worked for other states. Wyoming tends to be a more conservative state, which means we're a little bit slow for change. We're for small government. And I'd like to look at that on the positive side. I could sit and complain about how we don't do anything and we're not fast enough, but it is where it is. And so looking at what other states in our region are doing and seeing what's worked for them is really easy. It makes it so much easier for us. When I came to DCI and I asked them to, start the public database, I looked at what other states in our region were doing. So, the same thing goes. This time we'll have to fight for some legislation, and that's a whole nother world that I'm not familiar with. But I keep speaking with people and asking I hope the right questions and bringing this up. If Montana can do it, if Colorado can do it, if South Dakota can do it, why can't we? My fear is if something doesn't happen, there's going to end up being a lawsuit against either a sheriff's office or a police department because they knew something and didn't do something in a timely fashion. Now, they're not out there actively trying to sabotage missing persons cases, but when you don't have a protocol and you kind of just leave it up to the discretion of the sheriff or police chief, and they're not informed on missing persons, they make the wrong decision sometimes unintentionally. We've had several cases that we've worked on where somebody wasn't entered into DCI's database, or the NCIC is the internal database law enforcement uses. So if they don't report them missing, nonprofits such as myself can't help. It's harder to verify cases. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes before I can even put it on the group to the public. And then there's cases where they will take them off of NCIC before they've had a real sighting of them. An email sent or a text message made is not sufficient to say that person is no longer missing and they're safe. You have no idea what's going on. So it's not a matter of if, and really when. We've had cases already where sadly people have turned up missing and later been found deceased where they weren't even reported in a timely manner. So I would love to see something get put in place. And their study they've done, they're with WISAC, and the study is available on Kara Chambers' website, on the Victim Services website. It's a wonderful study, and it shows how each state compares. There's wonderful links at the bottom you can click on and go to each individual state. No study like this has ever been conducted. Emily Grant, if that name sounds familiar, she was the one that did the 710 missing Indigenous study. That was the number that was going around. She conducted that study as well. And so that Missing and Murdered Indigenous Task Force has really helped in highlighting how behind Wyoming is and where some of our problems are at in comparison to other states.
It brings us to a different, kind of on a different track here too. Where does your database and the information and the recent legislation that's been passed for missing and murdered Indigenous people, where do those cross?
So while I was working on my Facebook group, becoming a nonprofit, figuring out that we didn't have a public database provided by the state at that time, I think we were one of 12 states that didn't have a public database. I was bringing that forth to DCI, and we were figuring out how to not deal with legislation during that, which gratefully we were able to do it without dealing with that. The MMIP task force was being established, and they have quarterly meetings. They come up with all sorts of great ideas. It's very much community based. Anybody you don't even have to be a member of the tribe to be on the task force, but if you have an interest and a passion for missing and murdered Indigenous folks, then that's definitely something to look into. They're a great, wonderful resource. So we kind of collided in this while we were working from different sides of it. And being Native myself, it's become something that's important. It wasn't necessarily what got me started on this initially. But it's wonderful to be, I'm honored to be on the task force. It's one of, my mom is so proud of me being on that task force. She really is. Yeah. And being a member of the Blackfeet tribe, she's very excited about it. Now, I may not be Wyoming native, but you know, being native myself, I have a lot of pride in that, and I'm proud of what the task force is doing, and I'm always happy to work with them. And whenever we have meetings, you know, there's always great ideas that bounce around. Now, there's still a lot of work to be done. You know, I don't think when it comes to the missing Indigenous, I don't think it'll ever be solved 100%. I don't think it'll ever, and it's so sad to say, but it's definitely, at least we're trying, you know. And if others could help out, I think it would be really beneficial, just to get a new idea out there, just to get new anything really to go. And obviously, as an outsider, right, I've lived on 2 reservations, but I've never lived on their reservation, and I don't know what it means for them to be from their tribes. I know what it means for me. And so I think it's great to have local natives involved in that. It desperately needs help. I mean, they're way more likely to go missing. They're way more likely to be murdered, and we need to help desperately with that.
I think that's fantastic. I love the cross promotion and the work that's happening behind the scenes there. I do want to refer to something else that you mentioned just earlier about the DCI database. This is something that you had a hand in helping to really push through. DCI used to have the database for missing people used to be very kind of behind the scenes, and
Yeah.
you
So
were able to do some work on that.
yeah, so they did have a website, and there were maybe 12 cases, maybe 10 cases featured on their website. Now, I couldn't find it. Anytime I would search anything for missing persons, anything to do with Wyoming, it was buried. It was probably on the 3rd or 4th page back. And so when I started reaching out to legislators, I started reaching out to anybody that would listen, really. And I really didn't get, that was the one time I felt that I wasn't being heard initially. But once I got in contact with the right people, and Chief McFeeters was, you know, really a big help on this as well. I ended up going to a Casper City Council meeting because they were speaking about sex trafficking. Now, I'm talking about a state issue, and they're talking about a city problem, but they have the right people. And so he, you know, he called me up and he said, "Hey, I think you need to speak with Frosty over at DCI. I think this is a wonderful idea." Frosty Forrest was the director there, and he has since retired. He is a wonderful man. I mean, he took me down there to their headquarters and gave me this whole grand tour. And what DCI does is just amazing. So getting local authorities in on it was, if it, you know, I would talk to anybody that would listen. It was wonderful. And I brought this idea up, and I went through every state looking for a public database. And I'm like, well, you know, we're one of a handful that doesn't have that. We should. And I don't think it would be that expensive. And so that's when I met Kara Chambers, Emily Grant, you know, all these wonderful people that took part in this, and trying to, from their point of view and with their experience in their jobs, helping along the way with getting that going. And you know, now we're on to our next thing, which with the legislation part is going to be a little bit harder. But you know, I would hate to end on just getting that public database. I think Wyoming needs much more.
Well, you're out there getting that done. I want to shoot back over here to Jen, and you've been reporting recently on some really old cold cases. And Jen, I'm wondering what's the oldest case that you've reported on that you can think of that's just still sitting out there and there's been no closure for families?
The oldest case, and I just read a story about it, is Larry Marvin Morris, and he disappeared in 1974. And he was a seismographic, I don't know if that's the right word, seismographic worker, a college student from Oklahoma. And he was staying in Riverton for, I don't know how long he was there, but for work. And he decided he was going to take a trip to Yellowstone before going back home. And he never made it. He just disappeared. And the 2 guys were questioned pretty closely, and they were thought to be the people who murdered him. And it's believed that he probably picked him up while they were hitchhiking. One of them had just escaped from a Colorado prison, and they were later picked up with his car. and they were picked up with all of his identification. And so it's, it's pretty clear, but they were never arrested, and it wasn't, it just hasn't happened despite the efforts of,
Well, there's a lot of people out there who
can't
are,
say his name.
but there are a lot of people. There are private detectives and there are police detectives that have never given up on these things. And that's, I think, the gift of what you all are doing is you're keeping these in the public eye. I want to toss this back now to Desiree because I want to ask about the protocols, about the tools. Wyoming doesn't have anything right now that's a governmental edict that says this is what you do. So what should people do if they find that a loved one has gone missing? What should they do?
Yeah, it can be really frustrating. It can be, I can't even imagine going through that experience and the stress and the worrying about a loved one. First, understand you don't have to wait 24 hours to report someone missing. You don't have to be immediate family. Not everyone is fortunate enough to have immediate family or speaks with them on a regular basis. Turning to social media. And when you make those posts, obviously after contacting authorities, when you make those posts, make sure that you have the correct information. Make sure you have authorities' phone number listed. The scam posts that go around, they don't have any phone numbers listed or a county or a city that is involved on the case. Because why? They just want you to share. It says, please share. It's this push to just share. And so, having making sure it clearly states what agency the person has been reported missing with and where they were allegedly last seen. And that can be a tricky part of, well, where they were last at, and you start to do investigating and you find out, well, then they went to another county or city, and where should the report be filed at? And that can be a kind of gray area. But you shouldn't hesitate to call authorities right away. Making sure that that picture that you submit to authorities gets entered to NCIC is extremely important. We see constantly cases where the photo gets lost in translation somewhere along the way. And making sure the photo is provided makes a big difference in how many people share that and how many people can actually identify a person if they don't know them. The name and the height isn't going to do any good if they don't know who that person is and they're trying to find them and look for them. So I think those are all big things that need to be taken into consideration when you have a missing loved one. It can feel hopeless. Avoiding, I know you mentioned PIs, and they do wonderful work. However, anytime someone is asking for money in order to work for something, I would be very, very hesitant. I think the only time that is a good idea is more than likely on the much older cases, and you're making calm, logical decisions about a loved one that's been missing for a couple years or longer. Making sure you hire the right PI that isn't scamming you. And sadly, at this time, there's not even anyone that I can verify for to recommend for PI work. We Help the Missing was a wonderful nonprofit at one point that had several PIs, and to see the turn and burn of them, it was really sad to see that. And so Amanda Waldron, who works with me, she was a PI for that nonprofit. And so, it's devastating and it's frustrating if there was something more of a verified source to get PIs to work for families. I wish we had that. I don't know what the right answer is for it.
Yep. No, absolutely.
And
Oh, go ahead, Jen.
Sorry, I would add that Desiree is also a very good resource. If you do have a missing loved one, or if you have any questions about how to proceed, Desiree is amazing. And you can reach her just on the Missing People of Wyoming Facebook page. Correct, Desiree?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't mention myself. Yeah, of course.
You're kind of an important resource here, Desiree.
Yeah. I mean, you're always more than welcome to share flyers on the group, even if they've been shared before. We try to keep stuff, equal, right? We don't want one group or one case or another overtaking the group. But you're always welcome to share on the group. And if, family members or friends of those that are missing have any questions, I'm always available to help. And if you feel a case for whatever reason isn't being handled quite right, something might be missing, I can surely help to try to get a hold of the right people and politely ask to get those things addressed. And that's an important, thing to go off of, again, for the protocol for missing adults, right? Each agency is just kind of doing what they think is best. We had a recent case where they said they put out a silver alert. Well, Wyoming doesn't have a silver alert, so any county can call it whatever they want, but unless it's an Ashanti alert or an Amber alert, it's not going to anyone's phones. So everyone knows the Amber alert, but the Ashanti alert is much newer for Wyoming. And that's something that Kara Chambers actually kind of pushed for over at Victim Services. And it's a wonderful resource, and it's kind of a catch-all for missing persons cases. So if you know that they're really in danger, you know that they have dementia, and you can find that on I'm not sure which website it is, but if you search Wyoming Ashanti Alert, it'll bring up a government page, and it shows like the qualifications for that. And that's just been wonderful to utilize.
And the Ashanti Alert just passed this past legislative session. And one thing to be aware of, a car has to be attached to that person. And I just learned that. So it works like an Amber Alert, but it's for adults 18 and over. I think it's
Really?
18 and over.
Okay.
Yeah, but you do have to have, because it goes through YDOT, and
Okay.
they, for whatever reasons, want a case or a car. And I had a recent case where a person was known to hitchhike, and she was a very vulnerable woman experiencing a mental health break. And I was just like, can't we get her? She's probably on the highways hitchhiking. Yeah. And I was told,
because you said it just passed, we've noticed a few things that could be addressed with it. It's not perfect, right? But I think it's a wonderful start, and I don't know how difficult it would be to address some of those issues. I think on their website right now, they have listed missing, they have to have dementia or Alzheimer's as far as the memory portion of it goes. But we've had a few cases in recent history where there was somebody that had a recent head injury, and that resulted in them disappearing, and they had a car attached. There was another case where they had some sort of, what was it? Some sort of something else. It wasn't Alzheimer's, but it had hallucinations with it as well. And it's like, well, if there's an elderly man with hallucinations, that should count with that stuff, or if they're not diagnosed, what if they're not quite sure that they have it? Those are all questions that I think maybe we could look into getting more of a broader thing for that description, so that those kinds of cases don't fall through the cracks that are desperately needing that attention.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this in Wyoming, and you too are leading the charge. And it's really a wonderful thing to see, and for us to be a part of here at Cowboy State Daily too, to be a part of that platform to get that information out there to people. I want to just real quickly reiterate contact information. So anybody can be a part of the Facebook page, the Missing People of Wyoming Facebook page. Anybody can follow that page. It's a public page. Is there anybody else that you can think of? Anything else? If somebody is experiencing or is just desperate, or even, and I'm going to kind of switch tracks in my own train of thought here, even if, like you two, you don't have somebody in your family who's missing, but you want to be a part of the solution and be a part of the process. Desiree, you're a good point of contact for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, Kara Chambers, she's the head of the MMIP task force, and there's several other smaller nonprofits, I want to say affiliated or kind of attached by association for the native side of things. So if you're, wanting to help your community, that's a great way, as well as, of course, our Facebook group. I think there's some wonderful people over there trying to help as well.
That's fantastic. I want to thank you both for being a part of our podcast today, for bringing this really very important issue that affects us all in one way or the other, in one way or another. It really affects us all here in Wyoming. And so thank you both for the work that you're doing. And thank you folks for tuning in to the Roundup today. This has been a foray into a real kind of a much more serious topic than what we usually discuss, but it's one that really needs to be a point of discussion. And so we're glad that you were with us today for this. If you have ideas, folks out there, listeners, viewers, for a topic that we should discuss on the Roundup, or a person that you feel would really, we need to interview and we really need to introduce to the rest of the state, please let us know. Get a hold of us here at Cowboy State Daily. Go back to our previous podcasts. You can find them all on cowboystatedaily.com. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's all sorts of ways that you can follow these conversations. But we're just glad that you were here today. Jen Kocher, Desiree Tinoco, thank you so much for being a part of our conversation today.